Hi, I'm Maria and welcome back to my channel, Maria Might Read That. And today I am talking about the books and series that I DNF'd in the second half of 2022. I have a video talking about the books and series I DNF'd in the first half of 2022 that I will link below if you're interested, and then these will be the DNFs of the second half of the year. In that first half of the year video, I did talk about The Liar's Knot by M.A. Carrick being a soft DNF, one that I wanted to get to and pick back up. And since that video, I have picked that up and read it and finished it and really enjoyed it. So that is no longer a DNF, so just an update on that. And then I was also on the fence about the Mages of the Wheel series by J.D. Evans and the Royal Champion series by G.M. White. Both I had read the first book and wasn't sure if I would be kind of motivated to pick up the next book or not. And as time went on, I just didn't really feel any urge to pick these back up, so I have decided officially that I'm not continuing with either one of them. So in the second half of the year, one of the books that I DNF'd was Never Die by Rob J. Hayes. And this is a standalone book, but it's part of a kind of standalone series of many standalones, if that makes sense. It isn't very long. I think it's 200 or 300 pages, and I DNF'd at page 75, so I didn't get very far into it, but I just wasn't really connecting with the characters or feeling a lot of motivation to kind of read about the specific plot that was happening. And it was part of a Patreon buddy read, and the other people who were reading it just weren't really vibing with it either, so I decided to just put it down. I didn't have a lot of strong feelings toward it. I could have pushed through, but it just wasn't one that I was very invested in. That being said, I do want to try more Rob J. Hayes because I did like his writing. I just think that this specific book of his wasn't the one for me. The next book that I DNF'd is one that I'm pretty bummed about because it was by an author that I've loved books from before, and that is Rise of the Vicious Princess by C.J. Redwine. And I have really loved and enjoyed C.J. Redwine's Ravenspire series, which is a series of kind of fairy tale retellings, and I just found the writing in them, that like something about them just felt so cozy and visceral, and just something about it always really immersed me in those books, and so I really loved that series. I was hoping that this new YA fantasy, I think it's going to be a duology, was also going to have that same kind of writing that just really pulled me in. Unfortunately, that wasn't the case, and I just wasn't feeling very invested in this, so I decided to put it down at around page 140. I think one of the things that didn't work for me is that her Ravenspire series is very much a fairy tale retelling kind of fantasy romance leaning series, and so a lot of it is about the romance, whereas in this, we have the romance and it's a princess bodyguard romantic setup, which I love usually. That's one of my favorite tropes. But I think that because there was also a kind of political plot, and for me, as someone who loves politics in books, I now have higher expectations of political plots. I kind of expect them to be more nuanced and more interesting and more complex. And this was very much a, in my opinion, not fully fleshed out kind of political plot. It felt very kind of, on the one hand, hard to follow. On the other hand, it didn't feel very nuanced. And so I just wasn't enjoying the political side of it as much. And I think that was interfering with my attachment to the characters because that's what their primary kind of focus was on. And so even though I was kind of enjoying the romance setup, I wasn't fully kind of, again, being immersed in it or vibing with it. And so I decided to just DNF. As I lean away from YA and read more adult fantasy, I'm being more selective about what YA I kind of devote my time to, and this wasn't really fitting those criteria for me. I do still love C.J. Redwine and hope that she's going to come out with more Ravenspire books. I really hope that we get another follow-up to those, and I will definitely be picking those up if they come out, but I think at the moment, this ongoing series that she just started is not for me. The next book is one that I DNF'd at the very tail end of the year in December, and it's probably the one that I'm like the most upset about because I just had such high expectations for it and I really wanted to love it, and that is Priory of the Orange Tree by Samantha Shannon. This book, I really wanted it to give me kind of a political, religious plot and lots of dragons, and just the setup of it when everyone talks about it sounded so interesting. It had so much potential. And while I think that this had really great world building, Samantha Shannon devoted a lot of time and build up to kind of making you familiar with the world building and really fleshing that out. And I think that all of her ideas are super creative and so interesting. It really didn't hit where it needed to for me as far as the characters go. I wasn't really feeling attached to any of them. I was interested in them for the first like 200 pages, I would say, and then as we spent more time with them, it kind of had the opposite effect. Instead of making me more attached to them, I became less attached to them. I thought that the pacing had a lot of issues. It was really slow, and again, for me, that's usually not a problem because I am a character reader, but when I'm not attached to the characters and I'm kind of detached and noticing that nothing's really happening in the plot and that things are moving really slowly, it pulls me out of the book a lot. And I just think that we didn't need to spend all that time. We could have had things move along faster. I've heard that the ending is really fast paced and that pacing is also off and that it needed to be just more balanced throughout. And from what I did read, I agree with that. I got 520 pages into this, and this is about an 800 something page book. So I was at about 65%, and pretty far in order to, 500 pages is a lot, so I have a pretty firm kind of established feeling about this. I could have pushed through the last 300-ish pages and just called it a full read, but I've decided that I want to try and DNF adult fantasy books, even if I'm at past the like 50% mark, because I found that that's where I have the best sense of if I want to DNF them, and I don't want to put myself in a slump by just making myself read like even a couple hundred pages of something I'm not really enjoying. So that's why I DNF'd this one, but I could have pushed through, and it would have been like a 3.5-ish book at most. And then one of the other kind of complaints that I had about it is that one of the things I'd most been looking forward to was the religion, because the setup of this is that one part of the world worships dragons and believes them to be gods, and then another part of the world is terrified of dragons, believes them to be kind of their absolute worst nightmare, and that they believe that the royalty line is the only thing keeping dragons from really returning. And so you have these very different conflicting beliefs around the world, and then you find out that there's another part of the world that now worships the dragon that once caused a lot of destruction. So he's called the Nameless One, and they're the one that is really feared. So you have all of these ideas and setups of different religions and dragons and kind of how they approach it. And I love that whole concept, but what I found in the actual execution of it was that it didn't feel like religion, because with religion, I think a big part of that is faith and not knowing and kind of just having belief. And in this, you actually have the dragons, who can talk, by the way, come and tell you specifically how things in the planet originated and how like the origin of species and what is true about the religions and what is not. And so you very much kind of don't have an actual religious faith thing. You just have this one is correct and that one is wrong. And you kind of know that based on the different characters and what's told. And I just was really let down by that. Those are all my thoughts on Priory and why I DNF'd it, but I do think that the world building had a lot of really cool ideas. So I do still think people should try it out and see if they vibe with the characters and the world more than I did. Those are all my hard book DNFs of the second half of 2022. I have one soft DNF. I'm very much on the fence of whether or not I'm going to pick this back up, and that is Voice of War by Zach Argyle. This is one that I was really excited for and talked about in my like top priority, I think it was my 10 priority series and where I ranked them. And this was one that I just had a lot of hopes for. I didn't get very far into this. I got maybe 20, 30 pages into it, I think, and I wasn't not enjoying it, but I also wasn't super gripped by it. There were things about kind of the characters that I already felt weren't, like the way the characters were written weren't really clicking with me, but I also was in the middle of kind of my big life slump at the moment, and that was when I just wasn't reading much of anything. And so it's one that I might go back to. I have heard since then kind of reviews from people I trust that this might not be the series for me, just based on how the characters are written and the focus on the characters, but I do feel like I didn't give it enough of a proper chance, so I might go back to it. I just don't know when that will be, and it's not really a high priority for me anymore, but I do kind of want to give it another chance. So soft DNF for now, might pick it back up at some point. And then I have 4 series that I DNF'd in the second half of the year, and the first of those is the Saints of Steel series by T. Kingfisher. I read the first of these, which was Paladin's Grace, in July, and I did not have a good time with it. I gave it, I think, 2 or 2.5 stars. I really struggled with the amount of like lust that the two main characters have for each other and the focus that that's given in the book. It felt like every time they saw each other, that's kind of all that was going through their minds. And that really took away from the rest of the story for me. It did have a lot of like charm in the rest of the writing, a lot of really unique kind of creative details that I'm told T. Kingfisher is kind of known for. So I do think her writing has potential to be something that I like, but I don't know if her fantasy romance does. I picked up another one of hers, got like only a few pages in, but it had the same kind of sense that it was just the same focus. I think I also had some issues with the plot and kind of the ending and things like that, but I honestly don't remember. I think it's overshadowed now by this, just like the overall amount of lust in the story, which isn't wrong. There's nothing wrong with that. It's just very much not what I prefer in romance or fantasy romance books that I pick up. So did not enjoy, will not be continuing on with this series. Then I have Ribbon World by M.L. Spencer, and the first book of this is Dragon Mage, which I read for the Femmes Aficionados book club. We have a whole discussion about it. I'll link that down below. I didn't have a bad time with this book. It was, I think, 3 or 3.5 stars for me. It was very kind of, it was okay, just not for me book. This was technically originally a standalone and then is now getting a sequel, which isn't out yet, but I just don't have a lot of urge to continue on with these characters. It's either an indie or self-published series. I can't remember at the moment, but I think it's self-published. And of the 4 co-hosts that we did this book club with and had the discussion with, 2 of them really liked this book, so I do still recommend people check it out. I think it's going to be more for fans of classic fantasy tropes, so things like academies and magic trainings and kind of good versus evil and that very much just like classic plot focus sort of story. From the book club discussion, I know that there are people who really connected to the characters. I didn't as much, but I think that, again, that's just very much a personal preference thing. So this is one that I definitely still recommend people check out. I just personally don't have any interest in picking up the next book in the series, but I think it's a solid, well-written, self-published classic fantasy series. Then I have The Sun Chronicles by Kate Elliott, and this I read also for a book club, which is the book checkout book club that I'm a part of, and this was my first real experience with like space opera sci-fi, and I haven't read a lot of sci-fi, which I think is one of the things that really got in the way with the series for me. We just read book 1, which is The Unconquerable Sun, and a lot of the sci-fi stuff went over my head. I wasn't really having a good time with it, but beyond that, I do think that the type of plot that it was very fast paced, it was very action heavy, and it was very kind of go, go, go sort of style, and it was not my type of pacing. And the character development, I actually had a really hard time with because it wasn't that I wasn't attached or invested in them. I actually think that the characters were very not well fleshed out. I felt like they made decisions that didn't make sense for their characters in certain points, or they kind of had different personalities at certain points of the story. It felt very much like they were reacting to the plot rather than fully fleshed, formed characters that were kind of living the story. It felt like they were kind of passively being dragged along by the plot. And so I struggled with that. But there were, again, in the book club, very different feelings, and a lot of people really enjoyed this. So take that with a grain of salt. I'm not a sci-fi reader. I am trying to dip my toes and kind of find my area of sci-fi. This was not it. Space opera, I don't think, is it for me. But I did struggle with the character development in this. So if you're a character-driven reader, I don't know if this will be for you, but for plot-driven readers or people who really like space opera, there are a ton of people that really love this. And then finally, I have another book club pick, which is Between Earth and Sky, and the first book, which is Black Sun by Rebecca Roanhorse, and we read this as also a book checkout book club pick. I did not have the best luck with book checkout book club picks, to be honest, so far, but I have loved the discussion, so that's great. But yeah, the books just have not been high ratings for me, unfortunately, and I am not going to be continuing on with the series for those reasons. Hopefully there will be great picks coming along in the next selections, but the first 2 just didn't go my way, unfortunately. And with Black Sun, I really enjoyed the first half. I actually thought the first half was a very strong book, and I was really having a good time with it. And the second half is where it really went downhill for me. My problems with this were that it felt like it lost a lot of nuance in the second half, and that it kind of went from adult to almost YA feeling. It felt like things became more black and white in terms of evil and good and just the characters. It felt like the characters became a lot more romance driven, and kind of that became they lost their agency in the second half of the book, in my opinion, for the sake of romance, and that for me felt very YA as well. And then I really did not like the abrupt ending. Everyone talks about it as a cliffhanger, but for me it felt like Rebecca Roanhorse just ended the book. Like, it was so abrupt that I genuinely flipped the page and thought that I was missing a chapter or something. So for me, just the ending was super abrupt and didn't explain what had happened. And then when I read the synopsis of the next book, it talks about things that we were not told happened at the end of the first one. So I don't understand why that information couldn't have been put into the ending. It would have been a stronger ending, in my opinion. Again, there were mixed feelings about this in the book club. There were other people who really loved it. So as with the other picks, this is very much one that I know is beloved. I really enjoyed the world building aspect of this. I think it really shines in that way. It has very much like pre-Columbian inspired and indigenous inspired world building and representation, and there is queer rep in it as well, and I think it's really strong for that. But I really struggled with the second half and that ending, and I just am not super attached to the characters now because of the way that went, and so I don't have motivation to pick up the next one. Those are all the books and series that I DNF'd in the second half of 2022. Let me know if you have also DNF'd any of these, or if you are actually excited to continue on. I'd love to hear that. That's all from me today. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope you have a lovely day.